This marks the 11th episode of The Way Work Should Work, our new podcast brought to you by Braintrust. A big thanks to all of you who've been listening every week. And if this is your first episode, welcome. We're so glad you're here. On today's show, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a minute, or maybe like 49 to 55 minutes, as we usually do, to reflect on our first 10 episodes, share some key learnings, takeaways, insights we've collected so far. And so let's hop in. What we actually want to start with, though, is I don't think, we've done 10 episodes of this. I don't think we've actually introduced ourselves yet. So maybe we'll give a little bit of background first. So I'm Adam. For anyone who hasn't met me yet, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Braintrust. Quick background on myself. I grew up in Ohio, did computer science at Vanderbilt in Tennessee, and then I moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area after that. That was about 16 years ago. I'm sort of an engineer turned entrepreneur. I've started 4 marketplace businesses. Braintrust is the 4th. Started a digital asset management company along the way. My first company was acquired by Intuit. My second one by Advanced Auto Parts. My third one's called Doctor on Demand, which is a large video telemedicine service now run by a good friend of mine, Hill Ferguson. And now I get to run Braintrust with one of my best friends in the world, Gabe. Gabe, you want to do an intro?
Absolutely. So, Adam and I probably couldn't have come from more different backgrounds. I grew up on a hippie commune in Northern California where we didn't have electricity for some of the portions while I was growing up. And it certainly didn't have computers or the internet or even TV. So Adam was kind of an engineer turned entrepreneur. I would say that maybe I was a hippie turned capitalist. But I grew up here in Northern California, up in a town called Cazadero. Both my parents, I would say, had interesting entrepreneurial journeys. My mom was an artist and taught the local drama society, and my father ran nonprofits in San Francisco. I fell in love with starting businesses when I was 18 years old. When I was in college, that's when I started my first business, and then started another one when I was 21 years old, which was a company called Modernize with a dear friend of mine. And it was a marketplace for home services. We were trying to make the process of finding a contractor a lot easier. An overnight success of 14 to 15 years in the making, and sold that company actually this year, which was a great success. And then after that, my wife kind of kicked me out of the house and told me that I needed to help other companies. And so for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been advising and investing in other marketplaces in Silicon Valley, and reconvened with my buddy Adam. We've known each other for 12, 14 years now.
Yeah.
To get Braintrust off the ground, and it's been a really fun adventure to get to build another company with one of your best friends.
For sure.
Cool. So listen, this is the first time that we've hosted a podcast, and I've been pleasantly surprised. Shout out to my mom, who I think was the first listener. But I've been pleasantly surprised. Actually, we've been getting comments every single day about people have been really enjoying both the guests and also the topics of future work. I'm curious, Adam, what's been interesting or surprising about this experience for you?
I've been a guest on podcasts before, which I actually really enjoy doing. So one of my learnings about this one is about hosting one is that you actually have to prepare a little bit, unlike being a guest where I do zero prep. But I, more seriously, we're doing this here. We started this in the spring of 2020, right when the COVID-19 lockdown started, and people were sort of forced to work from home and figure it out. And one of the most interesting things I've observed through all of this has been how people are dealing with that. What they're, you sort of get this mix, right, of people who are like, all right, I'm working from home now and I'm never going back, right? This is the new normal and they love it. And like, count me in that group for sure. And then folks that are like, man, I just cannot wait to get back to the office and my kids are driving me crazy. I mean, it's been a tough situation, especially for parents. And so, but seeing that mix of like people who would really rather be back in the office, and it's not zero, right? There are some people that would rather be in an office environment. So that's been really, really interesting to see play out. It's very historic. We're getting to watch it in real time.
Yeah, and it seems like also the personal side there, right? Like we've got to dive into what it's like in people's personal lives navigating these challenges, and the kind of the divide between work and personal life is definitely blurred even more over the course of the past months as people are living and working off of their kitchen tables or in their garages or at their on their living room couches, and dealing with things like homeschooling in addition to working. For me, it's been really interesting because I think like the if we had done this podcast before, it would have been a lot of predictions about like things that people would have had a year ago, predictions about how people are going to work in distributed teams, things like that. One of the most fascinating things for me has been that these predictions that people had a year ago about the future of work are basically occurring in real time. And also some of those predictions that seemed really far off, like 10-year predictions, are actually like happening right now. And there's probably like three that really struck a chord for me. One is probably the dramatic and accelerated move to distributed teams, right? Both large companies like Google and Twitter here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, but also large enterprises in places like St. Louis, right? We've seen folks like Nestle, companies like Porsche in Atlanta move to full distributed. And that's a big change, especially for large kind of legacy corporations that are not used to operating with distributed teams. So that's been really interesting. I would say that the second thing is more and more what we hear as a common theme is like the enterprise adoption of new work models, right? Um, I think the idea of butts and seats, everyone kind of knew was on its way out, and that concept just got completely crushed over this last kind of 5 months. And you see enterprises now adopting not just, hey, people work from home within 25 miles of the office, but actually, hey, we actually now can work with a global workforce. That's been really fascinating how fast that's changed.
I mean, like if trip down memory lane here, we started selling, getting clients on a Braintrust Q4 of 2019. We did a soft private invite only launch in January of 2020. And, it was back when just you and I were selling and Grady was kind of, just getting up to speed. And, we got a lot of like nods from the enterprise clients. Like, yeah, we know we have 240 aging technology roles on our job board. And yeah, we know we'll probably have to go outside of our four walls here. But, we still like to, have butts and seats. We like to look over people's shoulders. Like this is core stuff, right? And so we were getting it done, but it was a little bit of an uphill push. And then I'll never forget, March 14th or whatever it was, the lockdown happens. And that week, all of our clients call us basically and say, pause, like, we don't know what, like the world may be coming to an end here. Like we may all, stocks going to zero, like pause. And Gabe, I remember us looking at each other like, well, that's it. We're toast, right? We are done. And, and then April was terrible, right? Marketplace revenue was down 55% and May was just as bad. And then in June, thank God, the phone started ringing again. And, I'll never forget one of our bigger clients was like, yeah, that those like one or two roles we were talking about, it's actually 25 roles now because we still got to build all this stuff. And, now we're 3 months behind. We can't even get into our office space, right? I mean, it's truly, right? We got to see an acceleration of distributed work, 10 years in 4 months.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I go back to this feeling like everyone's done the hardest part now, which is like, I'll say like ripping the Band-Aid off, right? Like they've done the first few months of kind of getting the new processes, getting the new mindset in place. And it actually only gets easier and more valuable from here on out. And I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that. Yeah, it's just been a really super interesting time for the past 4 months.
So let's switch let's switch gears a little bit. We've had a pretty wide variety of guests. I'm really proud of the people we've had on so far. We've had academic
Yeah.
people, industry people, startup folks, blockchain people, non-blockchain people. Um, One quality a lot of them, I think sort of accidentally, a lot of them have in common is they're investors, either full-time investors or like Hunter, or invest on the side or have funds like you and I do on the side. So it's kind of an interesting even for I found the non-investing crowd, this seems to be an interesting topic. Interested to hear, Gabe, what's your, I mean, you have been a professional VC and an angel, and done this for a long time. Like what's your thesis on investing?
Yeah, I would say the kind of the thread that ties almost all of the investments together is this idea of, I would say, connecting people and then enabling people to kind of new ways for them to transact. So like new economic activity, new work opportunities, or new ways in which in many cases, because I've been involved in a lot of two-sided marketplaces, in many cases, how do you bring fragmented parties together to transact in a trusted way? And that's frankly like why I love marketplace businesses so much, is essentially they bring, people together, whether the category is cars or insurance or buying a house or hiring freelancers. What they do is bring people together that haven't been able to find each other in an efficient way, and enable them to transact in a trusted way. Um, and what that does is it provides new sources of, I would say, economic activity and also opportunity for both sides, right? Like, we see in the Braintrust world, there's, talented people distributed all around the world, that would dream of working with a company like Porsche or a Nestle or a Pacific Life, but there's just no way for them to efficiently find each other, right? I think we were talking about this guy Shehar, in Pakistan. Is this amazing, amazing freelancer, and is now like he's earned 5 times as much on the Braintrust platform as on any other platform that he's worked on, over the last 10 years, and he gets to work with large, really well-known brands, and like I love that part. Like I love the fact that we get to connect those people and enable them to find each other and transact in a trusted way, because I think it flattens the world and enables like there not to be such a disparity of opportunity. How about for you, Adam?
Yeah, well, those are great points. Completely agree with them. And for me, it's always been sort of two very specific things I've looked for. One of them is asymmetry. It's specifically like asymmetry of knowledge or information. I think all great wealth creation is based on asymmetry, and we live in the technology world, so it's asymmetry around business models or technical innovations. I remember being one of the first mobile native developers, in 2007, 2008. Like knowing how to be a mobile app developer was a massive asymmetric advantage. And Uber started in 2008, and they were the first ones to figure that out, right? And they had a mile head start on everybody else. And so I've been a technology investor. Well, I've invested in other things that have had horrible outcomes. So I try to stay in my lane and only invest in technology. And a subset of things, I like deep tech. I like machine learning and AI, where your asymmetric advantage is the data you can train the model on. Or in blockchain, just knowing what the hell a blockchain is seems to be asymmetric information these days, and what the hell you'd use a token for, and why that might capture value in a network better than people, or better than a share of stock, seems to be very asymmetric information, as far as our experience with raising these fundraising rounds have been for
Yeah.
Braintrust. So I love when someone knows something that everyone else doesn't. And then I love, but I don't have a great word for this, you know, psychopathic founders, people who will do anything inside the law to succeed. It's
Yeah.
grit, it's determination, it's resilience. You get shot in the face every day, and you get back up and put yourself back together, and you keep doing it. If you don't have that, don't play this game, right? This is an unpleasant game to play if you can't get shot every day and still keep going. And so, I saw that in, Rahul, who started a company called Reportive, sold to LinkedIn. Now he runs Superhuman. I saw that in Parker Conrad. I was one of the first investors in Zenefits. People who are, Gabe, you're the same way. I mean, it's, people who absolutely cannot be eliminated in the game. They won't allow it. You bet on them, or certainly just don't bet against them.
Yeah, there's this thing we were chatting about this yesterday, which is like, as an investor, there really great returns come from being contrarian and right. So often there's kind of these party rounds, and everyone kind of all gets in and on something that seems to be like everyone agrees that it's right. And really the interesting stuff happens when you're taking a contrarian bet and you're being right. And of course, to be contrarian and right, you have to be like psychopathic as a as a placeholder, but like you have to be so driven, because every single day people are telling you you're wrong, right? The investment community is telling you you're wrong. In some cases, the press or even competitors, things like that, are just telling you you're wrong every single day. So it takes really a mix of bravado and resilience and clear vision to be able to do that every single day in the face of such adversity.
100%.
So it's actually interesting. So we've gotten some great advice from guests on the topic of investing. I'll start with one of the personal favorites, Hunter Walk, who's managing partner at Homebrew. Full disclosure, they're an investor in Braintrust. Hunter told us on the show, he says, "We love being challenged. If we're not excited about something, we ask ourselves, why not? And we invest in people." And I just love this, because it's basically, if it's obvious, everyone would be doing it. And Adam, you and I, when we were trying to raise money for Braintrust and we were first starting out, people kind of didn't really get the idea. Didn't really get the crypto component or the blockchain component of what we were doing. And so they just dismissed this as a toy, or as as this kind of crazy idea. But just because you don't understand something doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a kind of a there. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about that, about this, like the experience when we were first starting, and maybe some of the things that you remember about that experience, because it was not an obvious bet for a lot of the investors to make.
Yeah, for sure. What Braintrust does is, we allow our users to own and control this marketplace, and we do so with a new technology, with a blockchain token. And so I remember when we started this thing 2 years ago, and we were raising the seed round. It was just two idiots and a PowerPoint, basically. And you've got this one very hard thing: build a global labor marketplace that transacts in hundreds of thousands of dollar jobs, not $5 jobs, right? It's literally never been done. Just straight up never been done. Then use a blockchain token to capture value and ownership and control of the network. Do not use shares of a Delaware C Corp. Also really never been done. So investors would look at us and be like, so you're doing two things that have never been done, and you have to do both of them well. By the way, the other thing I've learned about when we do podcasts is no matter when we're recording, a leaf blower will be right outside my door. 100% guaranteed. And so, look, that was, we bit off a lot there, right? And, fast forward 2 years and, in subsequent sort of fundraising conversations, it's, the two concepts are still hard, but now we have proof that we're doing it, right? So it gets easier. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this on one of the things that Scott Belsky, he's chief product officer at Adobe. He was also an investor in Braintrust, and before that was the founder of Behance. And he was also an investor at Benchmark, right? So he had a really interesting perspective on investing, and he said oftentimes things that seem fringe or on the edge become the center, right? So crazy ideas, if you go back in the rewind machine, like to the way in which software was sold before, it used to be sold as like on premise, and you had big racks to be able to do all of your computing. And then this guy came along and said, like, instead of buying all the software up front and putting it all on your site, what if you just actually paid for it monthly? And you didn't have to have any software, didn't have to have any hardware on your site to be able to do it. And that seemed really crazy at the time. And now, everyone knows that to be Mark Benioff and a company like Salesforce, which gave way to cloud computing. And so oftentimes things at the fringe, things that seem a little crazy or at the edge become the center. And I think that the reason that we've chosen to do this is that we see that it is at the edge. We see that it's a contrarian move, but we see that user-owned economies will become the center. Not only because it's better for people, but because it's actually a better way to build a company, and it redistributes the value more equitably to all the participants.
This actually reminds me, what you're saying reminds me of another common thread we saw with some of these interviews with investors. Yep. So at the end, we like to ask this question from, famous question from Peter Thiel, who, I'm a huge fan of. He's an investor at Founders Fund. His question is, what's something you believe strongly that most people don't think is true? And, I think we asked Ian Lee from IDEO, Hunter Walk from Homebrew, Scott Belsky from Adobe, Jesse Walden, his new Variant Fund, Robert Leshner from Compound. And they all kind of had the same answer. Robert's, I think, was the most memorable. It was like, I don't know, like basically everything I do is something that most people think is totally false, but I believe strongly. I think Robert said, like, I would like to invert the question. Like, what's something I do that anyone thinks makes any sense? Right. It's just endemic in this industry, right? It's sort of, it's bizarre world sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of that comes down to passion, right? Like a viewpoint that you have about the way in which the world is or should be, and something that you're willing to dedicate your time and energy and your reputation on pursuing, right? In the face of adversity, in the face of everyone telling you that you're wrong every single day or that you should do something else. I mean, listen, I remember this moment when we were back in the seed round and we're raising the first capital to get Braintrust off the ground. And we literally had an investor say, guys, if you wanted to start an Indian restaurant, we'd fund you. Like, you guys are reputable. You built multiple companies before. Just don't do this idea. If you want to start an Indian restaurant, you want to start an insoles for women's shoes company, we'll fund you. Like, we'll write you a check. Just don't do this. And so it takes a lot of, I would say, both passion and excitement and resiliency to be able to kind of overcome that and continue to pursue your idea, even when everyone's like slamming the door in your face.
And listen, there are some days where I'd rather have an Indian restaurant. Just kidding. I actually am kidding when I say that, because like this has been one of the few startups I've been a part of where things are actually going better than we sort of lead on, and momentum. Look, a lot of this is luck, right? Or the COVID lockdown sort of forcing enterprise companies to figure out distributed teams has been an accidental, very strong tailwind to this business. But your point is right. I mean, look, this is our passion project. We're not doing this to like pay our bills or whatever. Look, if you don't have passion for what you're doing as an entrepreneur, like simply don't start it, right? You
absolutely
have no business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that passion and purpose are like, I would say, kind of the unifying threads across a lot of the guests that we've had, and specifically like their criteria for why invest in certain companies over others. One of the things that always has tied us together around this is this core belief that while talent is equally distributed around the world, opportunity is not, right? And our fundament, that's what drives a lot of the decisions that we make, and why we're choosing to do this is leveling the playing field um, around the world to bring more opportunity to amazing talent around the world. Um, we had a really interesting conversation with Stacy Brown Philpott, the outgoing CEO of TaskRabbit, where she talked a little bit about kind of the ethics of marketplaces and the way in which the gig economy has totally failed us. I'd love to get a little kind of your summary of that conversation. I know you've done a bunch of writing on the economic disaster called the gig economy. Maybe you can kind of reflect back on that and tie into some of what Stacy was talking about there.
For sure. Well, let me start by, Stacey's one of my heroes. She's such an inspiring person. She's one of the inventors of the gig economy. Interestingly, been one of the only sort of fair players, right? You hear about Uber, auctioning, the algorithm favors the lowest rate and thus, drives minimum wage down asymptotically to zero. You hear about DoorDash rolling out a tipping feature and then stealing the goddamn money,
Yeah.
horribly offensive things. Like these businesses like extract value from people who work at the minimum wage level, and they have effectively lowered the minimum wage from $12 and something down to $5. This is a Georgetown University study that did this research back in 2017. You don't hear this about TaskRabbit, right? I mean, Stacy created a fair and level marketplace, and such a valuable one that IKEA thought, well, we need some solution to assemble our nonsensical furniture, and look at this wonderful marketplace that of people who can come and help out. So, and we use TaskRabbit at our home and our business, and all the time. And it's just, look, I think the way she went about growing that marketplace in an equitable way is something that's not been widely reported, right? I think it's easier to talk about the bad things that the gig economy has done. So I'm a huge fan of hers. I'm hoping she just recently left her CEO role. I hope she runs for governor of California. We could use the help.
She's got my vote.
Me too. Sorry, I'm managing my I have a fleet of leaf blowers outside that I think they just blow at the door when they know I'm recording something. So let's switch gears here. One of my favorite conversations was with a good friend, Robert Leshner, who's the founder and CEO of the Compound DeFi protocol. Full disclosure, he's a investor and formal advisor to the project. He's been super helpful with helping us figure out decentralized governance. We're actually forking some of Compound's code that will help users vote or delegate their tokens once we publicly launch. But a lot of people say Compound and by proxy us as well are crazy to give up all this control, and when you're 3 or 4 years into the project, sort of let the community run it. But that's like the point of having a user-owned and controlled network. I mean, Gabe, what do you think about this? How do you sort of explain this to your smart friends on like why you would build a valuable network and then give it away?
Yeah, so I think you got to think about a couple of components of it. I kind of break it down to 3 parts to say, like, okay, well, why do fees matter? So typically, marketplaces or networks, they extract a bunch of fees from the users, right? And why does that matter? Well, it matters because it puts the users at odds with the operator. If you have an environment where you're taking 30%, 40% of what the users earn on the platform, especially as the networks grow, it starts to put the users at odds with the operator, and provides a really strong incentive for people to start going around the network, right? Going off platform, things like that. So that's like why fees matter. The second part is saying, like, okay, well, why does ownership matter, right? What is that value? Why is that valuable? Well, the value of a lot of these networks is essentially the people and their contributions to the network. And the problem historically with like Web 2.0 marketplaces had been basically all the value gets built on the backs of the users, and all the value accrues to a very small number of people on the cap table, most of them in Silicon Valley, and even a smaller number of venture capital firms, right? So it perpetuates inequality. Some of the inequality that we see today is the value gets built on the backs of users and essentially, vacuumed up by a small set of venture capitalists in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's good for society. We're seeing a whole bunch of kind of externalities to that kind of extractionary model.
It's this phenomenon where, marketplaces, two-sided marketplaces are very difficult and expensive to build liquidity on, right? So you got to go raise tons of venture capital. All that venture capital goes to subsidize one or more sides of the marketplace. And then fast forward 10 years, assuming it worked, it usually doesn't, right? Assuming it worked, you've got now a majority investor owned network, and those investors need and frankly deserve a return for the risk capital. And so how do you get that return? Tax the transactions, right? And right as a company is getting into the S curve of their growth, the investors, the operators will start really ramping up fees. And that's what you see with all these mature marketplaces. And that's bad for the users, right? It corrodes network effects, and it makes it ripe for disruption. And that's where our user ownership model comes in. And I should be, I also want to be very specific the way we describe, when we say the term ownership or user owned, we mean control, right? Like voting, like one token, one vote. You get to influence the product roadmap, the business rules. And, some people might, sort of scoff at that. Like, well, who cares about control? And, nobody votes their Facebook shares, right? And sure wouldn't matter if they did, because only one guy's vote matters in that network. But, it turns out, look, if you're going to make your living on a marketplace, and it's your livelihood, you care quite a lot about those rules, right? Like, what fees do we charge people? Who should be allowed to transact here? What are our standards? What does the brand mean? What categories are we going to play in? I go back to the DoorDash example. If, DoorDash decides to roll out this tipping feature, and then where you can tip your Dasher after he or she delivers your food, and DoorDash ran it for a year, decided to keep all the money, book it as revenue, right? Just straight up stole the money. If DoorDash had been built on a platform the way Braintrust is, where it's user controlled, user owned, that just would have been impossible, right? So when we say ownership, we truly mean control over the platform, not ownership like we're getting a dividend or something, a profit return or whatever. Braintrust is actually a nonprofit network, right? There's no profit to return. It is what we know in economic terms to be referred to as a public good, right? It's a protocol that connects labor with people who need them. And so we're proving this out in this, sort of narrow but deep, tech talent and enterprise two-sided marketplace, but it can and will work in all two-sided marketplaces.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting segue for us to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that we're seeing in the way in which kind of the future, what we're seeing in the future of work and kind of where it's headed. We had a chance to talk to my friend Ryan Holmes. He was the founder and CEO of Hootsuite. And he talked about that distributed work was going to be essentially kind of table stakes. And that's not to say that every business is going to be 100%, but if you're not offering that up, if you're not offering up distributed work as one of the values or why somebody would join, essentially your competitors will be, and they're going to take all the best talent. And so we're also seeing really interesting things like Ryan, he hired a CEO for Hootsuite, which is almost 2,000 employees. He hired that CEO virtually, right? And that CEO's never been to their office, at least at the time when we talked to him. And their teams have never met. That would seem nuts. If you said that in February that you were going to do that with a high growth tech company, that you were going to hire a CEO that's never been to your office, never been to your team, never met your team, to take that company over from you, like that would seem nuts. And just even a few months later, you see how quickly the world has evolved and how quickly companies have adapted. That was one of the things that really stuck out to me as like an interesting thing of how this whole move has been, this shift to distributed work has been a decade of evolution in the last 5 months.
I mean, we're like watching history happen here in real time. It's really amazing to be, part of it.
Yeah.
And then then we had on Matt Mullenweg, who, you and I both known for years. He's basically the godfather of remote, distributed work. He's the founder of WordPress, which is a 1,200 person, fully remote company, no offices. He was doing it before it was cool and before the government made you do it. And so he really is sort of the dog father here. And he actually had, it's a great episode. He had a lot of practical advice for giving employees autonomy and how that leads to better outcomes. Very similar, Gabe, to your and I's ethos here of, you measure output, not hours in, right? And it's, let people work from wherever. I remember we hired our chief of staff, Anne, who just absolutely keeps this place rolling and, has a purview into every aspect of the business. I remember when she started, she was joining her fiance who was working in Europe. And she said, okay, well, I'm going to, do my first 2 months or whatever of my job from Europe. And we're like, all right, whatever, let's see how it goes. And she was amazing, right? Because we don't micromanage people. We don't care about when they're working or where they're working. And she did phenomenal. We were actually worried when she was coming back, like to San Francisco, like, is she going to be as good when she's not in Europe? Fortunately, she is. She's amazing.
Yeah.
And so look, and Matt, Matt sort of invented this, right? And, he sort of reminded all of us that, like, if you're hiring exclusively locally, you're excluding 99% of the population, and it is impossible to achieve true diversity, and that's another thing we have in our Braintrust talent user base is, we didn't sort of plan it this way, but it's an incredibly gender, racial, age, geographically diverse group. Obviously, right? Because it's global, because we didn't say 50-mile radius of San Francisco.
Yeah. Well, Adam, I thought one of the most kind of prolific on this topic was Joseph Fuller. He's a professor of management at the Harvard Business School. We got to touch on this topic that that really kind of grinds my gears, and that's, I would say, people incorrectly assume if you bring on a freelancer, they're going to like steal from you, right? And that's just like patently false. They're no less likely to steal from you than any full-time employee sitting in an office, right? So that's just one of those kind of misconceptions, I think, that has been really interesting to explore with our guests, is that whether you have a W-2 person or whether you have a freelancer, and whether they're 10 miles from your office or 500 miles from your office, now really doesn't matter, as long as they have a strong internet connection and access to the tools, and obviously the skills to do the job.
100%. Yeah. Professor Fuller was amazing. We actually got to be guests on his podcast, which is somewhat more professionally produced than ours, I will admit. I'm sure he has a larger audience, but anyway, he's great. I strongly encourage you to check that episode out. Yeah, but it's an interesting point, right? You remember when the COVID lockdown started, you had all these endpoint security company stocks go up, right? Like Cloudflare, these companies that sort of they're BYOD, bring your own device security companies, because all these sort of normal in-office companies had to figure out how to secure their network in people's homes, whereas freelancers have been doing this as a normal course of business already. So. It was the last piece. There was something else he had that was super. Go check out the Harvard Business School Future Work podcast. It's really great.
So for those of you who've been listening each week, you know that we typically do kind of a lightning round at the end. So I thought it'd be fun for Adam and I to answer these questions that we've been asking all of our guests. So I think it's probably time for some new lightning round questions after this. We'll continue to evolve these, but anyway, here goes. Adam, what have you learned about yourself during shelter in place?
I have learned that there are an abundance of leaf blowers on my property, just so much more than I knew when I was going to an office in San Francisco every day. No, that's not fair. I learned that truly autonomy over my daily schedule is probably the most important thing in my professional life. And I don't want to sound like I'm just towing the Braintrust line or whatever. Like it truly, like, I will not be able to go back to a normal commute after this. It's been years since I've had one, but being able to sort of like have creative time when I need it, and then go back to meetings when I need to, and be able to like take a long walk, or, you know, you and I go hiking together all the time or whatever. Like, autonomy over your schedule, I always knew I wanted it. I just had no idea how necessary it is. Gabe, how about you? Same question. What have you learned about yourself during shelter in place?
Yeah, up until this, I've always thought of myself as like a classic extrovert, right? Like I've led go-to-market efforts and PR and sales, and those things like typically very like extrovert ways of operating and being a part of a company. One of the things I think I've learned about myself, and maybe this is part like getting older and part like forced shelter in place, is the amount that I need, or that I thought I need, like the face-to-face human connection with a bunch of different people. I think I had a perception of how much I needed that. And the reality is, I think I actually need that a lot less. And I found myself being replenished with time spent by myself, or time spent, in a hammock or on a chair reading a book. And I've noticed more and more that that's actually kind of like what fills the tanks up for me, even more than being out at social events.
What about an old way of working that you hope never comes back?
Business travel.
Me, same. I was going to say, like, basically everything. So business travel, conferences, staying in hotels and, places I don't want to be. I used to run, 500-600 bucks a month in Ubers, just getting like done, right? We're all done with that. I used to have status on all the domestic airlines, which is just a punishment from hell. I hope none of it comes back. Gabe, what about Silicon Valley? On the way up or on the way down? We're talking about how cities are unbundling right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like the time horizon really matters here, right? Like, are we looking at something within our lifetime, or are we looking at it beyond? I think that if I'm looking at this over the course of the next decade, I would say that Silicon Valley is more of a mindset, meaning how the expectations of pace and audacity, so how fast things are built and how big they're expected to grow, is a mindset that is unique to Silicon Valley, and it attracts people that want to do that, right? The same way that LA attracts people that want to be in the movies and make blockbusters. And so I think that what I've seen over time as I've traveled around the world and visited little, other startup communities, is that that mindset is starting to kind of get dripped out to other areas, but there's not a concentration of people that all share that same mindset in such a densely concentrated area. I am really interested to see, like, I have so many people that have moved back with parents, or moved to vacation houses, or just like moved to places like permanently. Really hard to imagine those people going back to their houses and sitting on 1.5 hour bus rides to Mountain View. Like, that's just going to seem nuts. So I'm really curious to see how and if this settles back in.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that sentiment. I think a lot of our guests that answered this question, I think probably agreed with you there. I'll take a little bit of a contrarian viewpoint here. I moved to San Francisco as an engineer, to sort of turn entrepreneur, when I right out of school, basically. And I remember the reason I did it. It certainly wasn't for the weather or the amenities. I mean, it's not a great place to live, honestly, the city of San Francisco. And I've been there my whole adult life until very recently. But I would go to meetups in like basements in office buildings in Soma, and there'd be not 10 people like are in most technical meetups, like 150 people who all want to do the same thing. They all want to learn. Like when I was getting up to speed 4 or 5 years ago on blockchain, I'd go to these blockchain Berkeley meetups. Um, and they would, they'd have like 60, 70 people, and you go around the room and I'd be like, oh my God, like almost every project I've ever heard of is sitting in this room, right? And it was unbelievable to meet these people and network. And they came from all over the world. Almost no one in the room had English as their first language, right? I mean, it was a real, and so look, COVID and the lockdown and the economic disaster, like, are all things that have accelerated the sort of structural demise of the city of San Francisco, which has been crumbling for decades anyway. And I think the city of San Francisco wants tech out. I think they want to go back to how it was in the 70s. And if that's what the majority of people want, then that's what they should get. But there's something to be said. The point I'm trying to make is around people from all over the world congregating in one physical place to push a nascent field forward. And Silicon Valley's always been that geographically. And I haven't seen anywhere, that could supplant it. Right. So I agree with you. It's a mindset, but try as they may, I don't think the Bay Area is going to shake tech, Yeah. All right. Rounding out here. Gabe, if you could fast forward any specific business, not necessarily by name, could be by function, by 5 years, what would it be and why?
I would say, rather than specific business, more category. The thing that I would actually like to see accelerated is more venture capital being deployed to both female-owned businesses and also like diverse founder-owned businesses, right? I mean, it's a well-known fact that I think this is got to be 0.25% of venture capital goes into female or African American founded companies. And I would like to see that. I think that you're starting to see some more ties start to shift, but I would like to see a dramatic shift over the next 5 years. And I think our country would be better for it.
Yeah, great. It's funny. My answer is actually similar and adjacent. Mine would be also around funding and sort of gatekeeping capital. I think, look, for as abundant as capital is right now, and trillions of dollars being pushed in, and they're buying ETFs, unfortunately, right? But even with venture capital being over allocated to negative interest rates and all the rest of it, it's still too hard for first-time entrepreneurs to get risk capital. It's just too hard. There needs to be an AWS for risk capital. Amazon even talked about doing this. I don't know why they're not. They're busy stealing ideas that they're being pitched and building them into Amazon's core business. But there's just no excuse for first-time entrepreneurs, minority women, people not from California. There's no excuse for them to have to move to California and pitch for 2 months while a bunch of gatekeepers decide whether or not they should get 500K, right? That's just a stupid, anachronistic system.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking a little bit more on the investing side, what's one company that you wish you had invested in the future work, maybe besides Zoom? And you're already an investor in Braintrust, so besides Zoom and Braintrust.
Yeah. I don't play in the public equities market because it's just too much cognitive load for me.
Maybe what's a category, I think, that maybe in future work that you think has real opportunity? Maybe we can change that question and talk about it that way.
Yeah. I think this sounds a little weird because there's so many of them, but I think distributed collaboration tools have a long way to go, right? I think I was asked on another podcast, what's your favorite collaboration tool? And I said, none of them. They are, other than Google Docs, they're all terrible, right? They're all I feel enslaved by them. I won't name them, but one of them begins with an A and ends with sauna. These are awful tools. They're not well thought out. They're just, we did these shared whiteboard tools. come on, like we can do better. Like we've got high def cameras that can see where you are in a room. Why can't we draw on the air? We got VR headset. Like, why isn't that better? Why are we still like putzing around in Google Docs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How about you, Gabe?
I think that I I actually think that there's a interesting opportunity, maybe not like a classic tech opportunity, actually to build distributed leaders. So like actually of tools and training to be able to help like the next generation of leaders coming up that might be operating with distributed teams, because it's fundamentally different, the way in which you lead distributed teams versus the way in which you might lead a company in an office, right? And I think that typically if you're leading companies and offices, what happens that the people that end up getting promoted are like the loudest voices or the most extroverted or the most that like look like the senior management. That perpetuates like a certain type of people continuing to be promoted. Oftentimes those are typically men. And so I think that there's a real opportunity now with distributed teams where the value of a leader is really around like, can you help your people produce results? Are you reliable? Like, can you communicate really clearly? Can you enroll people in a shared vision? And I think what that does is it presents an opportunity for a kind of a whole class of leaders that might be more introverted, right? Or they might come from different backgrounds, to really take leadership positions in companies that are growing. So it's a whole class of new leaders that I think it would be really interesting for there to be products and services built for.
That's an awesome response. I mean, that we could do like a whole other podcast on that topic. All right, we'll round it out here, Gabe. What's something you believe strongly that is an unpopular view today? Just pick one of them.
I mean, the idea of user-owned economies, and the idea that you would want to essentially in a marketplace that you would want to drop fees to 0%, right? From typically the way in which it's done, and why you would want to give out ownership and control and voting to all of the users. Like everything that you and I do every single day and we take for granted is a wildly unpopular view today, and has been for a few years, because nobody can point to an example yet of that working at scale. So listen, but everything that we do every single day is a wildly unpopular view, but it starts to, as Scott said, like the edges start to look more and more like the center every single day. How about for you, Adam?
Yeah, similar, and a little adjacent, I think. So I strongly believe, and this is intensely unpopular. Trust me, people tell me all the time. But I strongly believe that all extractionary middleman businesses, basically anyone taking, an appreciable fee out of a two-sided marketplace, will eventually be replaced by software that powers a nonprofit network. And I say that, and people are like, what are you, a socialist? What's wrong with you? Why don't you like profit? And I'm far from a socialist, far from it. I believe you can have wealth creation events and build enterprise value in networks, and also treat the participants fairly, and use a nonprofit agnostic software backbone to blockchain powered to facilitate all this. And it's positive sum thinking, right? You can treat people fairly, let them make a fair living, and become wealthy creating it. You can do all of these things. It doesn't have to be zero sum.
Well, Adam, like, thank you so much. And also thank you to our listeners so much for joining us today and every week. This was, we're now on our 11th episode, right? And this was just an idea, even just a few months ago. So we hope that you're all enjoying the podcast. If you have any feedback, good, bad, otherwise, please follow Adam and I on LinkedIn. You can also find us on Twitter and message us directly. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you have great podcast guests, we'd love to hear your recommendations there. Thanks so much for joining us on The Way Work Should Work.
That was fun, Gabe. Thank you.